said. Well said. Too brief, but well said.
I recognise the honourable member, Andrew Williams.
Thank you for recognising me, because you didn't in the Corrie Lounge on Tuesday morning.
I was close, though.
Calling me Brian once again. So thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I think that's about the 5th time you've called me Brian in the last 2 months. But as you did say in the Corrie Lounge, you do always recognise me correctly in the House. But having said that, Brian, sorry, Mr Speaker, New Zealand First does support this bill, and we commend Damien O'Connor, the local member for Labour there, for bringing this to the House and helping sort this out on behalf of the Tasman District Council and indeed its ratepayers. Mr Speaker, at the end of the day, there were some administrative errors made. Everybody makes mistakes. It would appear, listening to the speeches of the National Party members, that nobody makes a mistake. They seem to think that they are perfect and that people shouldn't make mistakes. But, Mr Speaker, in this situation, quite simply, what happened was a map was not included when they sent out the advices with the official documentation to the ratepayers, and the map did not determine exactly where the rates were being struck in terms of Liger Bay and Tata Beach. And it was simply that omission of provision of that map that ended up that the rates that were struck were not deemed to be valid for the area. And we need to rectify that so that for those 4 or 5 years, the rates that were taken are not required to be clawed back. Because to try and claw them back and go and try and refund those rates to those ratepayers would be almost impossible, because properties change hands, owners change hands, and people come and go, and therefore it would be virtually impossible. At the same time, if those rates were refunded, the burden of the cost of those rates goes on to the remaining ratepayers of the district. And why should the remaining ratepayers across the Tasman district pick up the tab for what was simply an administrative error? So it's a lose-lose situation for all, in the sense that we have to validate it to turn it into a win-win so that everyone can just get on with this. At the end of the day, Mr Speaker, every council has a collective responsibility across every community to provide for stormwater and all sorts of other services. In this situation, there was a collective responsibility to provide this infrastructure in this area. They have, through this area, had some significant flooding at different times. They've had some terrible disasters and storms that have gone through the Tasman district. And at the end of the day, they are very dependent on having stormwater provisions, and this is just one of them. Also, Mr Speaker, we heard today that from Nick Smith some interesting comments, and he said that, and also so did some of the other national members, that councils are responsible for making sure this all happens, that there's a responsibility on both the councillors and the council staff to ensure that this all goes tickety-boo and goes to hand. However, Mr Speaker, much of this is also on the basis of what is handed to them in terms of the legislation from this Parliament, from central government. And councils have to work within that legislation. And too often, central government politicians, particularly national government politicians, criticise local government and say that they are not fulfilling their requirements. And yet what most of the time, Mr Speaker, they're doing is actually carrying out what is required by them under legislation. And it's very interesting where the Honourable Nick Smith talks about the rate rises running at 8 or 9% in some areas of New Zealand in the early part of the 2000s. Well, one of the reasons for that, Mr Speaker, for instance, in the Auckland situation, and it was identified in a number of reports, is that Auckland, for instance, received $7 billion of underfunding for its roading and infrastructure over a 15-year period from central government petrol taxes. And as a result of that, that's one of the reasons why Auckland got into an incredible traffic jam. Because had Auckland received the amount of petrol taxes that the people of the greater Auckland region had paid over that 15-year period, they would have had $7 billion more in the kitty to spend on roading and transport infrastructure in the Auckland area. As a result, today, Much of the roading, which is now being completed, which was started under the Labour government with support from New Zealand First in the mid-2000s, but as a result, much of that is now being finished. It should have been finished probably 10 years ago. Also, as a result, much of the other public transport infrastructure would have also been completed. So we can't always point the finger at the councils. In this situation, again, Tasman District Council, and where the Honourable Nick Smith says that councils like Tasman District and others have to cut their cloth and work on behalf of their ratepayers, and Nicky Wagner said the same, the chairman of our local government committee. However, this very same government, national government at the moment, looking at the local government amendment bill, is in the process of removing development levies from the council, how the councils operate, how they take their revenues, removing development levies from provision of community infrastructure. And community infrastructure covers things like sports grounds, recreational facilities, libraries, swimming pools, all sorts of community facilities. And those development levies that are taken on new subdivisions, on sections, on subdividing properties, on new builds and all that sort of thing, go towards the overall kitty, a little bit like the collective kitty for Taita Beach across the Tasman Bay. They go to the collective kitty that provides for the councils to then provide the necessary infrastructure for their community. But under the national government at the present time, they're looking to remove that, and it's very interesting as a member of the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, sitting on the hearings at the moment. And we've had hearings in Wellington and in Auckland, and we've heard from councils, from developers, from associations, from all sorts of organisations across New Zealand. And at the moment it's running about 9-1 in terms of opposing what this government is doing in terms of removing those development levies from community infrastructure. 9-1. Very, very few in support of what the government is doing, and as usual, it's their old mates, you know, the ones from the Business Roundtable and those sorts of people who are supporting that. But in fact, most of the authorities throughout New Zealand, most of the people who know, in fact, indeed, developers have come along to the Local Government Environment Committee and have said this is not on, this is not good legislation. Removing development levies from community infrastructure will be a retrograde step, and what it will do will put more rates onto the ratepayers. It will result in more rates on the ratepayers. In the case of the Auckland Council submitted and said over the next 10 years, as a result of this legislation from the national government, the rates will have to increase by something in the order of 8.5% over the next 10 years if the development levies are removed from community infrastructure. That is shocking. So we cannot have the likes of Jackie Dean, of Nick Smith, of Nicky Wagner, pointing the finger and saying rates have to come down, and we'll probably hear from the toxic one, Maggie Barry, shortly about the same thing. But we'll get a round of roundup from Maggie Barry very soon, and we're bound to have an attack from her on local government. And she'll pour borax all over local government and attack them for the rates rises, while she sits on the very same local government committee that is about to remove the ability of councils throughout New Zealand to levy development levies on developers for community infrastructure. She can't deny it, but that is what is going to happen. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, HV, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First supports this bill. We commend the member for bringing this forward. No one likes to look at retrospective legislation. It is always a difficult thing in a House to have to validate situations like that. But in this case, New Zealand First is firmly of the mind that this is necessary, it is valid, we must do it, and we must allow this community to get on, and we wish the Tasman District Council, all those in Liga Beach and Taita Bay, all the best, and we hope that we can put this behind us and get on in the best interests of that community. Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
I call the Honourable Philip Heatley.
Speaker, to